All right. Welcome everybody to the third Summer Research Program Pitch Day. My name is Faniel Mwindi, and I'm the Chief Resident here at SAI, and I'm really excited to welcome you all to our family here at SAI. So traditionally, actually, one of the things we do normally in these pitch days is to do a line acknowledgement. And so I really welcome you all to go to our website and read our line acknowledgements as we give thanks and honor the lands in which we inhabit wherever we are in the world. So I encourage you to go to our website and check out our land acknowledgement. So at SAI, we're a launchpad. What we try to do is to enable researchers and practitioners to basically build this high impact informal science engagement programs that connect people to science around the world. And we do this through three programs: that our summer internship, our fellows program, and our residential program that we recently launched. And so our summer program is actually fairly young. We just wrapped up our third cohort, and the big goal here for the program is to provide undergraduates an individualized guided experience to allow them to design new research proposals that examine diverse questions between science and society. And I want to reiterate here, it's really about designing these research proposals where we give undergraduates the opportunity to really be at the driver's seat in designing the question that they want to address and create a proposal around it. And so it's really exciting when you watch them come in with ideas and develop them over 10 weeks, looking for preliminary data to back them up and say, yes, I think I'm knocking on the right door here and barking up the right tree. And there's a lot of potential for really cool data we can get from this study. And this class is no exception. They were absolutely amazing and awesome. And so we meet every week. And it's amazing that you learn so much about all the students and all the diverse stories, all the diverse questions they're asking. And so I want to say thank you to all of them for taking a chance with us and spending some time with us here. And all the mentors as well that are there: Amanda, Crystal, Clarissa, Claire, for taking the time again. And so I'm really excited to see all your projects come to fruition. And I've already started with my thanks. And again, I told the mentors, thank you so much. We can't do this without mentors. Our staff, there's quite a few people there involved in just getting the word out, making sure the interns have the information they need. Special thanks to Corey for stepping in. He's our new program manager and making sure everything is running smoothly. And I know that really it's been amazing to have him on board, and all our residents for answering all the questions that the interns may have bugged you with along the way. Funding is always important. We are really thankful to ACB, the American Society of Cell Biology, for providing funding to do this work. And we are now excited to figure out what we're going to do next summer. But funding is really important vehicle for this. So thanks to them. So today, what's going to happen? Each of the interns are going to give about 7 to 8 minute pitches. All right. And then we're going to follow that with a short Q&A. And so we welcome the questions from both YouTube and also right here in the Zoom room. Just drop them in the chat or just raise your hand and we'll get to you. And so we do have 7 interns that are going to go through. So the session might be a little shorter than usual, but please do indeed send them along the way. You can also drop them in the chat, as I mentioned, and then the interns can address the questions throughout the talk. So you see the QR code there. We really love to get your feedback. So take your phones out if you're watching this in the long distant future with your phone. Take that link there and fill it out closer to the end of the pitch day so we can get your feedback. I will also post this in the Zoom room for those who are here, so you can click on it again so that you can provide your insights. And so here's the order. So we're going to have Asha, Grecia. I have a video that I will present, then Abu, Anoush, Nhi, Kat, and Laz. And again, I want to welcome you all to to Pitch Day. It's always exciting to get going. And so I want to welcome our first presenter, Asha, who was mentored by Amanda Coletti. Asha, welcome to the floor.
Hello, everyone. Give me 1 second, please, as I share my presentation slide. My name is Asha, and I am a rising sophomore at Dartmouth College. Today, I will be speaking with you about open source science and storytelling, with a proposal that seeks to investigate the impact of narrative structure on adolescent engagement. So when I was in middle school, I had a little crisis. I was really into biology, but I didn't really know how to explore that interest online. I was too old for PBS Kids, but too intimidated by the academic journals I stumbled across when I Googled the word genetics. I wanted to go beyond what I learned in school, but not by scrolling through endless lines of academic jargon, which is a feeling shared by many others in this age group. Middle schoolers, like I once was, are at pivotal points in their lives, old enough to understand complex ideas while still being rich in their youthful imaginations. Please excuse me. And the data shows that a significant part of their lives occurs online. The average 11 to 14-year-old spends 9 hours a day on the internet, 78% of which is spent consuming content. As a result, these individuals consume up to 74 gigabytes of information in a given year, which is what a Renaissance scholar used to consume in their entire lifetime. But in spite of the crazy amount of information available on the internet, and information specifically about science, one of the great problems facing STEM today is adolescent disinterest. Studies have found that interest in STEM declines by 23% from the beginning of middle school to the end of high school, with an enduring interest in STEM being largely formed by age 14. According to University of Iowa researchers, this is, quote, a pattern most pronounced for girls, ethnic minorities, and low-income youth who report less positive attitudes about science, participate in fewer relevant extracurriculars, and are less likely to pursue further study and career in STEM. I believe that open source science is uniquely posed to tackle this challenge due to its accessible and online nature. Open source science calls for the production of scientific communications that are free to access, use, and download by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Its growing adoption has led to increased audience diversity, global reach, and viewership. But even though studies conducted by institutions like Cornell University have shown that open source science has many positive outcomes, very little data has been collected about how the composition of such pieces impacts engagements, especially for those with middle school audiences. This is important because there is a crucial gap between accessibility and engagement. Just because knowledge is available, this doesn't mean that the public will find it relevant, interesting, or worthy of their time. The challenge, therefore, lies in understanding why this gap exists and how it can be addressed. One attempt to bridge this gap is with narrative structures. Narrative structures are the different ways we frame stories. For example, the YouTube science and other academic disciplines channel called TED Ed uses a chronological structure to recount the 2,400-year search for the atom, starting in ancient Greece and ending all the way today in the 21st century. On the other hand, the science website Ology uses an interactive structure in their climate change section. Throughout their stories, readers have to make their own choices that result in new plot lines and different endings. So, this proposal seeks to understand how the narrative structure of these open source communications impact adolescents, the adolescent engagement with them, with adolescents being defined specifically as children aged 11 through 14. I will begin to do so in my first aim by selecting and categorizing open source science communications by form, content, and structure. In my proposal, I established a list of criteria that communications must meet, and I will use the quantitative systemic review method in order to see if they do. The communications must be focused on the life science, be open source in nature, have a target audience of adolescents, and possess a narrative structure. This method would work well because it produces results that are not only quantifiable, but also reliable and reproducible. And it is able to do so by breaking down information about the narratives and information contained within them into discrete parts. This therefore makes it possible to divide the eligible communications by form and narrative structures, whose various options you see on the screen. This leads to my second aim, in which I intend to analyze the communications I select. This would require a twofold analysis, one of which will rely on passive data, while the other will draw upon active data. I will first extract data from online tracking sources like Social Blade or Rephonic, so I can compare the reach, engagement, and viewership of the various communications. I will also conduct a qualitative focus group made of middle schoolers themselves, so we can better understand if and why they engage with things differently. From there, I propose developing an online platform. This platform will act as a launchpad for adolescents to explore their interests or questions about science by hosting a range of resources with different forms and structures. That way, I will be able to use the insight gained earlier in the study to compile pieces that are compelling to this audience and track their engagement with it in real time using Google Analytics or the like. So you might be wondering, this seems cool and all, but why does it matter? And the truth is, it matters because as kids get older, they get bored, they find themselves detached from science, and they feel daunted by the subject itself. It is clear that current methods to appeal to them or flood them with information are just not working. More must be done so that kids of all backgrounds can be enriched by the exciting knowledge being produced in the life sciences. And I believe this can be done at the intersection of open source science and storytelling. Stories allow us to have emotional connections to subjects and appeal to our sense of humor, curiosity, and adventures in ways that can light up a middle schooler's eyes in which academic journals simply cannot. This study will allow me to determine the implications of engagement with communications that use narrative structures to captivate middle school audiences. We can learn how this impacts, we can learn how this impacts STEM identity, the spread of knowledge, science literacy, and so much more. This knowledge can even be integrated into middle school curriculums and made available to science education providers, so that one day, when a kid goes scrolling through the internet, they can find something that goes beyond what they learned in school that might spark their very own passion for science. With that, I would like to thank you all for listening and extend my gratitude to my amazing mentor, Ms. Amanda Coletti, the program directors and managers of this program, the Sci Network, and my fellow interns whose great work you all will be hearing shortly. I'll be happy to take questions if you have any, and thank you once again for your time and attention. And here are my citations.
Okay, that was our first one. Congratulations. Asha, so that was the easy part. Now it gets interesting. Questions from the audience. I'm happy to, of course, I have a million questions, but I will refrain from asking them. Rosario, go for it.
Hello, great job. It was wonderful to hear your talk. So my first question, or I guess I'll just do one question first, because I imagine there are other questions, was about your focus group. So usually your focus groups are going to be small groups of people. Have you spent time thinking about who you would want to recruit to that group and why?
Thank you so much for your question. Yes, I have definitely thought about the demographic breakdown of the qualitative focus group I intend to conduct in this study. I hope to replicate conditions found in schools by making sure that the students involved reflect the ethnic and gender diversity in the United States. I think it's particularly important to make sure I include underrepresented minorities and low-income youth who typically do not make up the majority of practitioners in the STEM field.
Okay, great. Maybe one more question, and then we have to keep moving. Okay, so Asha, I'll throw this quick question to you. Did you manage to get any preliminary data at all that that kind of tells you that you're barking up the right tree?
So I was able to obtain data that exists already about how open source science has appealed to middle schoolers, and specifically how narrative structures have been able to close the gap between accessibility and engagement. But so far, there have not been many studies conducted on how the composition, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, impact engagement specifically with this age group.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so with that, Asha, thank you so much for that. So you get now chill and relax and ask all the questions of the other interns. I will say that to all of you that are watching, today is actually not their last day. What they're gathering today is additional insight from the questions that they get from the audience here before they submit their final proposal at the end of the month. So this is kind of they're presenting their ideas, and then they're seeing their feedback, and then by the end of the month they'll send us their final proposal, written final proposal, which will be exciting to read, and we'll post those online, so check that out online on our website when ready. Okay, so up next is Grecia, and Grecia, I have her video, so I'll be sharing her video today here. She is here as well somewhere. Yes, she's here. And so she'll be able to take the questions after the video ends. And so here is Grecia.
Hello everyone, my name is Grecia, and today I will talk about my research proposal named Developing a New Approach to Understanding the Ecosystem of Science Dissemination in Mexico, Geography, Activities, and Characteristics. As I said, I am Grecia García-Elizalde. I study biochemical engineering at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana in Mexico, and this is my last year of college. Well, I would like to start this presentation by saying that in Mexico, there has been an increasing interest in science dissemination, and some significant initiatives have emerged. However, the traditional approach to research in this field has been individualistic, just as you can see in this article, where they are looking at just one science communication program. And there are many other articles like this that focus on just one small area of the field. Thus, little is known about the science dissemination ecosystem, making it impossible to notice some areas that could improve and new applications that this knowledge could bring. Well, in order to fulfill this gap, I am proposing to research this main question. What is the current ecosystem of science dissemination in Mexico? And specifically, I am interested in where is science dissemination in Mexico being done? What are the activities, and who is the audience of those activities? Well, to answer the main question, one of the things that I would like to do is to characterize the level of science outreach activity in science centers and professionals across Mexico. And this is relevant because it will help detect overlooked points that need special attention. For example, using preliminary data about the distribution of science and technology museums in Mexico, I created this heat map, where the darker the green is, the more centers there are. And from this map, we can detect that there are unequal distributions of science centers in Mexico. Thus, there are underserved regions. But this is not all. I am planning to go deeper and analyze the distribution, taking into account factors such as population and surface per state. This way, as I said, I can go deeper in the understanding of this problem. In addition, I would like to see what are the activities that these centers offer to the public. This way, it could be easier to identify the activities that have been overused and propose innovative ones. And again, for example, using preliminary data, I created this network map to show that here, the green nodes are the activities, and the gray nodes are science and technology museums that do those activities. And as we can see here, for example, more museums have graphical and historical exhibits than the ones that do public demonstration of experiments. Well, to conclude with this aim, I want to say that I feel confident about the results that I could achieve with more data and profound analysis. So I think this is a very strong aim. Now, my second aim is focused on the main government institution that provides funding for science and technology in Mexico, named CONACYT. This aim is to understand the key characteristics of science dissemination projects funded by the National Council of Science and Technology in CONACYT in Mexico. And again, I want to say that CONACYT is a major funder of science and technology in Mexico. And I chose the same because it could help evaluate these projects using different parameters so those projects can improve. For example, using preliminary data, again, and taking 10 out of the 19 projects that CONACYT approved for science dissemination in 2021, I created this bar plot where you can see the activities on the y-axis and the audience on the x-axis. Also, each color is a different activity. And as we can see, there are few more science dissemination activities for people that work in science than for the general public and professionals. And in addition, there's a greater diversity of activities. But there are more characteristics that could be analyzed, such as the number of people that attended those activities and the geographical distribution of them. Lastly, for my third aim, I want to use all the collected information to make a tool that could help improve science dissemination in Mexico. I am proposing to build an active database and network of science dissemination projects across Mexico. In this active database, practitioners could upload their activities so the public and other practitioners can see them. In addition to the activities, the public would know when and where the activities will take place so they can assist. Well, I consider that all three aims have a huge potential for discovery, since the traditional approach to research in science dissemination here in Mexico has been individualistic. Analyzing the ecosystem of science dissemination in Mexico could provide fresh perspectives and new goals in the Mexican science dissemination field. And hopefully, this proposal could benefit Mexicans. For example, the government can detect underserved areas and propose innovative projects. And with the tool that I propose in my third aim, the practitioners and audience will be more connected, increasing the outreach of the science dissemination activities. To conclude, I would like to thank Manuel Mundi for all his help and for always making me go further, and Cory Warshaw for his advice. And that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Okay. Gracia, are you hiding somewhere in there? Please, yeah, that was a great presentation. Questions? The floor is open. All right, Rosario, you got the floor again. Let's do it.
Thank you. Good talk. I enjoyed that. So I have just a question about why you chose to focus on activity versus content, because I could see a scenario where based on the demographic that they're targeting, they're going to focus more on specific content knowledge and kind of disciplinary content than on types of activities. Like if it's towards the public, it might look different. So I was just curious why you chose to focus on activities.
Well, I choose activities because I think in Mexico there are some activities that are not focused or doesn't target like general public. Like for example, historical exhibits may not be appeal for some people here in Mexico. That's why I target specifically activities. Or for example, some workshops here in Mexico may not have that success. So I think we, instead of areas of knowledge, I choose activity.
that's why. But I also kind of did a little research about the activities, and I have a network that shows that in case you want to look at that, because yeah, I contemplated that. And at the end, I give you like a link, so maybe you can look at that. But yeah, I consider that too.
And something you can add as well, Rosario, right? She can add this as a dimension essentially of that. So
yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Let's see. There's a question in the chat. Susie's asking, actually no, so Asha's feedback providing, this is a great idea. Do you know of the PCST network? This member seems like someone who would be interested in your project. Oh, Susie, thank you for that. So Gracia, make sure you click that link.
Yeah, definitely.
And, check it out. Yeah, this is, I like this cross connectivity here that's happening as well. So yeah. And I'll remind you all again, these are proposals at this stage. The interns are getting additional feedback and insights. So this is fantastic because they're going to be writing up these formal proposals by the end of the month. So with that, thank you so much, Gracia. Stick around. Of course, she's around. If you other questions, drop in the chat, and Gracia will be able to answer them. Up next, another one of my interns, Abu. Let's do it.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm having some, okay, no, sorry about that. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is AbuBakr Sangare, and today I'll be sharing my research project, a proposal to understand and address factors for low-income Black students in pursuing STEM fields. So let me first start by sharing who am I. As I mentioned, my name is AbuBakr. I go by Abu. I use the he series pronouns, and I'm a chemistry and anthropology double major at Williams College, proudly from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Now, it's important to sort of know my research, to also know a little bit of my journey. In the fall of 2021, I was one of only 2 Black chemistry majors in the whole entire college. Now, I've always had a passion for advocacy and social justice, but this really transformed my thinking and gave me a new perspective within the classroom centered on representation. With this, I had a question of how can I use my privilege from Williams College to make an impact in my community? So, setting up the stage a little bit, when I began my project, I started using Google, researching, finding all sorts of articles, all sorts of Pew Research studies, and countless links, such as the ones displayed right now, to different studies. Now, in this overwhelming sort of field, my anthropological brain started to kick in. A lot of these are centered around data and numbers, and they show the issues. But I believe that numbers alone, do not capture the full picture. Sort of why is this happening? So this really helped me as I developed my central research questions. My first of one being an intellectual understanding, right? What are the lived experiences of low-income Black students that influence interest in STEM-related fields? And sort of the second being really more action-oriented around how can we take this understanding and implement it in ways that address representation gaps in new ways. So this brings me to my first aim, to characterize the lived experience of low-income Black college students. To characterize the STEM lived experiences of low-income Black college students. So at the center of this is really to understand and gain nuance from the student perspective, using an anthropological understanding, and to treat these human experiences as robust, hard data points to really guide understanding. Right. What I hope with this would gain is access points, critical points as to when, where, and how our experiences mapping out students' engagements with STEM. So this brings me to my preliminary data. I conducted an anthropological interview with a Black male low-income humanity major at Williams College. And recounting sort of his educational journey, he shared throughout middle school and high school, he initially wanted to be a medical doctor and study medicine. But I believe this quote displayed on the screen really displays sort of one of those critical points where he felt discouraged in his journey when sharing during his high school chemistry class. He was one of 2 Black students in his high school chemistry class. And he continues to state, I think the fact that he was only one of two, did make it harder to ask questions and to seek help. So the analysis here being, this is one of those critical STEM-related experiences that really influenced, in part, his academic trajectory through college. Now, I could go on and on about sort of the data that this conversation brought. You mentioned standardized testing, more on representation, his positionality, socioeconomic class, and really his relationship towards STEM being in middle school, high school, and even as he looked towards it in college. I think it's important to note at the conclusion of the interview, my last question was sort of centered around, how do you feel? Are you confident and comfortable with what you've chosen to study? And he recounted yes, pretty confidently, continuing. If I felt more confident in my STEM abilities, I might have paired it with another major or even just explored that interest a little bit more. I believe this has a critical sort of what if clause, right? Which is really rich and brings a lot of data, bringing me to my larger point of this sort of style of study and research is very promising for future research. So the idea here being, this is what one interview brought. Imagine what 50, what 100, hundreds of interviews could bring, sort of connecting us and allowing us to see new data, new patterns in ways that bring nuance towards understanding the whole picture. Again, with this being really student-oriented, this brings me to my second aim, understanding the mentorship models that currently exist for DEI programs, what they're doing, and ascertain areas of improvement. So listed on the screen are a few mentorship models I've adapted from the Indiana University School of Medicine. What this would do is understanding these different models. What I would continue to do is to survey and see what programs are doing, identify, their success rate based off of what the mentorship models that they're choosing to implement are. This, I believe, would give us critical insight into what programs are doing, where is it happening, when, at what age, and most importantly, how, what sort of the mentor style is. Now, looking at the broader impacts, this study holistically, I believe, would allow us to capture experience, sort of adding robust data, quantifying the quantifiable, those human experiences. Looking forward, I also hope that it would allow us to create a database, because we would have sort of a lot of data from different models, see what's working, and be able to compile them into one centralized location that would then allow for new sharing mechanisms where programs could have sort of crosstalk and see what's working, how can we implement that into our programs. Sharing a little bit of myself, this summer I'm continuing research, although not with this program, at Stanford University as an Amgen scholar, and I hope to use the lessons that I've learned in this program, both in my time here at Stanford, as well as I continue to apply and hopefully matriculate into grad school this upcoming fall. With that, I would like to give a huge shout out to Dr. Fanuel Mundi, my direct advisor, for all of the help and time and patience that he's given me throughout the summer, everyone at STEM Advocacy Institute, as well as one of the program directors, Corey Warshaw, for all the help he's been. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll now take any questions.
All right, I have no questions. Yeah, I think you've received all my questions from across the week, so I will refrain. Questions, thoughts, comments. Let's see, there is a question in the chat. Okay, Abu, great job encouraging the fusion of STEM and humanities approaches to get at the root of many of these questions. Do you expect to have difficulties evaluating programs that might be using multiple mentoring models?
I do. In short, yes. I feel like the devil can be in the details, understanding sort of what they're doing, but I think also trying to look at sort of when and how are they choosing to implement it. So even if they are trying to sort of implement multiple different models, understanding how that can be affecting the students at different points in time throughout the relationship.
And you could also look at how much of each model they're using. And that could be a gauge where you say, okay, this one is using mostly X versus Y. So you could do it that way. Amanda.
Hi, Abu. I really loved your presentation. I really loved how you used qualitative data to try to get some of that rich experience where numbers don't always tell the full story. So I really appreciated that. I was wondering, what did you learn during this interview, or something that you wish you had asked but didn't have a chance to ask, something that came out of this interview that if you were to do more interviews, you'd want to discover a little bit more deeply?
So I think if I could do more interviews sort of surrounding, like I could interview more subjects, I think I would focus a little bit more on the educational experience, like, because when we were talking, he recounted like, starting in middle school and high school. So I really left it a little bit open-ended. I think conducting interviews moving forward, I would ask sort of, what have been your experiences at different grade levels to sort of try and glean out that data of, again, looking at those access points, these sort of forks in the past that influence the trajectory that students might have.
Great, thank you.
All right, last question, Rosario.
Hi, thanks. That was great. So I am actually doing something kind of similar, so my questions might be hard. I'm sorry. So my question here is kind of about the theory driving some of this, because usually when we approach these questions, we're looking kind of at you're asking a specific question based on existing theory, or you're developing theory based on some of the cognitive interviews that you're describing. So because a lot of these experiences tend to be specific to the cultural institution that you're a part of, I'm wondering if you might benefit from kind of narrowing your question to a specific type of organization to really kind of get at how students within this particular organizational structure are responding to that. And I put a paper in the chat for you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think sort of going, maybe, I'm not sure, maybe if I'm misinterpreting sort of the beginning part of the question, but could you repeat the first part? I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. I think that I don't think I ended up asking you a question. I think I gave a recommendation. I'm sorry.
So the big thing there is narrowing it down, and her point, Abu, is maybe localizing it to a specific organization type of school, right? Might allow you like to start from maybe Rosario, right? Because right now he's a bit broad. So one of the things we did in this program, by the way, for everybody, is narrowing things down even further. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very, very uncomfortable. Boo, we've been there. We've been in the trenches thinking about narrowing things down. So I think Rosario's suggestion is actually really, really great as well. So thank you for that, Abu. There are more comments in the chat, so just look them up over there. All right. I will just, as a fun fact for you all, so we are using this, we're using an NSF scaffold model. So all their proposals, you may notice their aims that they're there. We're actually following the NSF GRFP. And so the students are getting that experience already of being in the driver's seat, right? So maybe in the future, who knows, some of these proposals may get some life out of them when they're applying to graduate school and someone is really gung-ho about doing science communication or engagement for grad school and they apply with it. So who knows? All right, so we're gonna keep moving along. Anoush, who was mentored by Crystal Chandra. Anoush, you're up.
Hi, hold on, give me a second. Let me just get everything set up. All right, hi. I'm going to be talking about communication and scientific realism, and I'm going to go pretty fast because it's a chunky presentation. To start off, I'm Anoush. I'm a rising junior at CU Boulder, and I study physics, English, and philosophy. I am a philosopher at heart, though, so to start this presentation off, like a true philosopher, I'm going to ask you a question. Are atoms real? I'm sure if you think about it, instinctively, you're probably going to go, yes, because atoms are a really big part of science. They're a really big part, especially the physical sciences. But they're also what philosophers of science call an unobservable, which means that we have no way of currently directly accessing atoms. So we have no way of actually figuring out whether or not they are the way that we think they are. And that question of whether or not we should trust what science says about things we can't see is the central question behind the debate around realism. Now, a scientific realist, which in my experience most people are, believe that there is an objective reality that's independent of thought and language, and that the scientific method can reasonably aim to access and accurately describe this reality. So if you think atoms are real, it means you think that the scientific theories around unobservables like atoms are at least somewhat accurate to reality. However, anti-realists argue that our scientific theories should never be regarded as the objective truth because A, science has been wrong before, and B, we can never know the alternative possible explanations. And even if we do have an alternative possible explanation, there is no way for us to choose between two conceptual explanations of the same phenomena because we are not omniscient, we don't know what's right. But that's what's going on in philosophy. And as this discussion has been going on, philosophers have started to trend more and more anti-realist, but more moderate forms of anti-realism, such as Van Frossen, who actually made the observation that inspired me to think about this. He observed that there aren't any anti-realists in a lab, that scientists trend realist despite the fact that philosophers trend anti-realist. And it's an observation that rings true to this day. And in my experience, I did a poll of my friends and colleagues at Seaboulder Physics and found that only 15% of them could be described as anti-realists. And I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, why is it important to think about what scientists think? Because scientists aren't philosophers, and this is a philosophical discussion. But the thing is, science is a human endeavor, and humans are affected by the things that they believe, whether they want to be or not. We cannot be fully objective. Therefore, understanding what scientists think about the aim of science, how good it is, like how it works, is an important factor in how science actually gets conducted. So I wanted to figure out how to understand that. And I thought that I would look to education, because where do we get a lot of our ideas and beliefs around things? It's from where we learn. So my research project is going to be on understanding what ideas about scientific realism and anti-realism are being communicated and received within STEM higher education. Right. And while similar research to this in terms of how realism and anti-realism should be conveyed in education has been conducted before, I intend on doing a slightly different approach, which is a more practical, in-depth analysis of how it's being conducted right now. And I intend on doing this by studying current educational material. So textbooks, syllabi, lecture notes, and if I have the budget and the time for it, lecture transcripts, exams, and quizzes, to understand how ideas about the connection between science and the real world are portrayed. And the thing is, if any of you have taken a science class before, you know that science does not talk about philosophy. Science classes don't directly talk about philosophy. They don't say, you know, you should be a realist or you should not be a realist. But as I was saying earlier about human endeavors and beliefs leaking into things that you do, the people who write the textbooks, the people who teach, their beliefs about these philosophical ideas still find their way into the way that they explain, the way that they describe things, the way that they connect the mathematical section and the conceptual section. And to analyze this, I'm going to bring in a little bit of a new method into science education, which is I'm going to utilize literary analysis. And literary analysis, which is well known for being the whole point of English classes, is an important factor and very interesting to use in this specific scenario, because the point of literary analysis is to understand what messages authors are trying to get across, regardless of whether or not the author intended on getting across these messages. It's, can you look at the words, the phrases, the way they describe things, the way they structure their writing, to make an argument about what ideas they're trying to get across subtextually, which is exactly what I would need to do to understand the subtextual philosophical ideas that are getting passed on through educational work, which is why I will be utilizing literary analysis. And to show that it is possible and somewhat effective, at least, I found 2 paragraphs from my freshman year physics textbook to analyze and to do some literary analysis. I won't be able to go through all of the different edits and stuff that I made to explain them all, but if you'd like to hear more about it, you can just ask me about it at the Q&A section. So for example, if we look at the first section in the preface to students, you can see that I highlighted physics and how the world works, because in that sentence, physics and how the world works are compared, which essentially passes the idea on that physics is inherently tied to the real world, which is a point, for example, in favor of realism, because realism says that science endeavors to find out what the real world is. So therefore, to understand science is to understand the world. And then, for example, we can also look at in the second section, the two things that I've highlighted in red talks about what is important for a scientific theory to be good. So in this case, it's talking about how the old quantum theory left features unexplained and lacked coherence and clear guiding principles. And then in the next sentence, he talks about what would be a more coherent, better theory. And the two factors that go into it, at least in the way that he describes it, is a prediction of the behavior of systems, which is more along the anti-realist side, especially in the sense of instrumentalism, and offering a satisfying description of how systems really work, which is more realist. And obviously, with literary analysis, it is more of an argument built over a lot of analysis of an entire text, which I didn't get the chance to do, but I'm hoping that when I get the chance to actually fully analyze entire textbooks, entire syllabi, entire sets of lecture notes, I'll be able to get a more coherent sort of idea on what specific kinds of realism and anti-realism are being promoted. So that's the information that's getting communicated. And how is that information being received? So that's what my second aim is trying to understand. And I intend on doing this through two sets of data collection. Firstly, a large-scale quantitative survey of physical science students, which will try to address their beliefs in realism, anti-realism, general demographic information to identify if there are certain factors that make someone more likely to be a realist, more likely to be an anti-realist, and other information such as previous history with philosophy, or do they like discussions, things like that. And then after which I'll be moving towards a series of a smaller group, but more intense qualitative interviews where I will hopefully get more nuanced information on their ideas about science, and also their ideas about how their beliefs in science affect the way that they intend on practicing science. And say, for example, how does your belief in whether or not atoms are real, or like electron waves are a thing, affect, say, the kind of research that you would maybe be thinking of going into if you decide to go into quantum mechanics research, things like that. So yeah, so far all of my research has been collecting data. What can we do with it? Why do we need this data? So firstly, I personally have a couple of potential avenues for continued research that I personally would like to conduct. Firstly involving, if this method of using literary analysis to understand subliminal messages works, then I would like to apply it to a larger range of content, because formal education is definitely not the only way people gain knowledge or form their own beliefs. So I would like to look at still educational material, but non-formal, such as books and documentaries and movies and things like that. And secondly, I'd also like to expand my research into the effects of beliefs around realism by actually researching how it affects scientists specifically. How do their beliefs in these different things affect the way that they go about conducting their own research? Have their beliefs changed while they've been conducting their research? For example, have they noticed that science is more fallible than they think it is because of the way that their research has worked? Things like that. And with all this information that I gain, hopefully with this research project and several subsequent research projects, I intend on designing an educational syllabus or program that will convey a more deliberately nuanced idea about scientific theories and methods, because I know for a fact that most STEM students probably will never independently choose to take a philosophy class. So to get across a more nuanced, interesting idea get across these more interesting, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. To get across these more nuanced philosophical ideas, we'd have to figure out a way to integrate it within STEM education instead of saying, hey, everyone who's a STEM student should just take a philosophy class, because it's probably not likely to work even if it is forced, because if most people that take a class just because they have to take a class don't generally go into it with the intent of actually learning the material. So yeah, what's next for me? I'm going to be graduating CU in spring 2024 if all goes well. And I'd like to work in career and then go to graduate school for philosophy of science, where hopefully I will get to pursue this research as a part of my thesis, and then hopefully get a job and live, I guess. So yeah, thank you to Daniel, Krista, Corey, and the entire team at SAI. This has been a wonderful experience, and it's been fantastic for me to actually go through and investigate my own ideas and come up with my own research proposal. And I'd also like to give a thanks to Professor Cleland, whose class inspired me to come up with this idea, and my friends at CU who helped me pick their brains for content. Yeah, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to reach out to me. And yeah, thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you, Anoush. Questions? I think we have one question. Jess, do you have a question?
Thanks, Jab. I have two questions, actually. So the literary analysis that you talked about, are you thinking about like having multiple scorers? Because right now it seems very subjective. It's just you. And I think there's other types of qualitative analysis where there's like multiple scorers. They combine their scores in the end. They're actually blinded to like what they're looking at, and it's just the words. So I'm just curious if you have plans for that. And then my second question is actually about whether you're sort of controlling for different types of writing, because I think if you're writing like a syllabus or if you're writing like an editorial piece, it might be philosophically different than if you're writing like a research paper, right? Like, so how do you benchmark those things?
So definitely in terms of would I like to have multiple people working on it? Absolutely. If I get the budget for it, and when I end up actually eventually conducting the research, if I have the budget and the support of people who would actually like to do it, I would absolutely love to have multiple scorers, especially since I know that this is going to be a very big project in terms of there's a lot of data for me to look at. And in terms of different types of writing, yes, the more I go through with it, I'll definitely have to come up with, like, as I'm doing the research, I will have to sort of look at the difference in the way the different sort of formats explain things and sort of come up with a different scoring system probably for each. It's not quite settled as a system in terms of how I'm going to go from my analysis to actual quantitative data in a sense, just because I feel like I don't have enough data to start making that benchmark or that sort of translation with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's something probably you would have to definitely think about the benchmarking as you get deeper and deeper in there. So we are sadly out of time there, Anoush, but there's some more comments and questions in the chat. Okay, so please get in there and answer away as you listen to the next set of talks. Anoush, thank you so much. Okay, up next is Nhi, mentored by Clarissa Wright. Nhi, the floor is yours.
May I have access to share my screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, give me one second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to cover climate change communication, considering gendered emotional responses. And my name is Nhi Nguyen, and I'm a mathematics major from Bryn Mawr College. And I have an interest in science communication, and one of those interests is in climate change. In the past, I've participated in the Sunrise Movement, Bryn Mawr Hub. I've walked in marches, organized meetings, coordinated events. And throughout this entire time, I was able to be exposed to a lot of climate change communication in the form of personal stories, speeches, songs. And I asked myself, what works? So my starting point is first, climate change. I know that there's already a deluge of climate change information already, but it's really important. I look around me and it's undeniable that these events are more frequent and deadlier. And so we start with the question of who are the victims? And research has shown that overwhelmingly the victims are the poor because of their dependence on natural resources, inability to relocate, destroyed assets such as houses or harvests. And onto the makeup of the poor, I had found the statistic that 70% of the 1.3 billion people living in conditions of poverty were women. And so considering poverty and women and climate, I had happened to come across the fact that women have shown to have more engagement in climate action, but there is only a small portion of them in current political bodies. So now looking onto the current research of how I can think of how to promote equity in this area, we're going to cover the areas of emotion, gender, and climate communication. So first is what types of emotions are effective, and what research has shown is that anger seems to stand out. There's a range of emotions that have been studied, like hope, fear, but there is the risk of complacency in using those emotions in messages, and it turns out to be that invoking anger is very effective in research. And considering gender and emotion, what I've been able to find is that males and females do have a different emotional response. Males respond most to anger, while females seem to respond most to fear and sadness. So given all of this information, I wanted to know then what is the type of emotions that can be found in messaging today. And in research, I had been able to find that there is a large, through Twitter analysis, there is a large number of messages with emotional words that evoke anger, and because it has a greater chance of spreadability. And so with all of this considered, I wanted to look into the gap of all of this research. Everything that I had considered had separated the sample groups into males and females, but only looked at emotions individually, such as the emotion of anger individually and hope individually. But as for my research question, I wanted to look into what emotional technique used to create climate change communication is most effective while considering gendered emotional response. And how this would differ from current research is that I would consider not just the emotion of anger inside the message individually, but a mixed emotional framing. And I would further explore my research question with these aims, and that would be, how does a mixed emotion framed message compared to a message framed with only despair or anger or hope. And then I would also consider what order of different emotions would lead to more climate change inside the messages that I provide in the study. And onto the preliminary data that I've been able to find that most matches the kind of study I would like to conduct is this 2019 study. So it had the sample size of males and females, and it also looked at the political parties of the participants. And so we tested the hypothesis: will participants prefer climate change messages that reflect their gender and political ideas? And so we see here they were given a 3-sentence summary, and I have here the highlighted key emotional keywords inside this paragraph. And so the analysis that was used to analyze the pre-survey, their qualitative responses were the univariate ANOVA, which is an analysis of variance, but only using it's basically asking whether the experiment results are significant, whether we reject the null hypothesis. And in addition to that, that study had also used a Bonferroni correction, which basically corrects for the error rate following the ANOVA. And so the results from that here in this table shows the means and standard errors collected. And I have here highlighted with the arrows the largest values in the rows. And it seems as though that we have a couple of anger versus no emotion, fear versus no emotion. So that generally these types of emotions seem to be effective in comparison to a message with no emotion. And overall, after the entire study was conducted, I made this just a visual. And so it seems as though that there's more of a correlation with the political parties and their likelihoodness of enacting in climate action, but only in the case of the Republican parties was there a significant difference between the genders in the male and females. And so just overall in the study, it's the framing of these messages in the way that they had framed in the samples before does not significantly change willingness to engage in climate action. So that's why I wanted to look into whether having mixed emotional framing could change this result, whether it can be more effective. And so onto the methods that I would use. So I would have a sample of 100 participants, divide equally women and men, and provide them a message as well, a paragraph of 5 sentences. And so here I have the first message would have sentences that would be designed to evoke fear, and after I would use the same analysis methods in interpreting my results. And as for the climate action that I would ask the participants to engage in after reading the message would be to sign a petition directly after the reading of the message. And so for the intellectual merit, I'm hoping that this will add to existing knowledge, in the intersection of climate communication, gender, emotion. So how this work is different is that it would just consider mixed emotional framing, and the future research areas that I would like more work to be done in is more research considering non-binary persons, or differing the message length, the speaker gender, considering topics like affect psychology, or just extending the study for a longer period of time. And for the broader impacts, the results of the study, I hope, will help on the organizational and individual level in creating climate messages. This is a very difficult experiment to design, just because when you're creating a message designed to provoke an emotion, it isn't guaranteed that the participant will feel the intended emotion. But so this study that this proposal that I had created is just using the previous research as a guide, and current research on which emotional words have been shown to get this intended reaction from participants before. And so it's not going to be an all-encompassing guide for future climate change communication, but the messages that are provided in the study, I hope that the one that is showed to have more climate action as a result of can serve as a model for other organizations. And the benefit of effective message is very clear. It's with brevity and it being memorable. There's a likelihood for it to be spreadable, and it means less wasted time and sustained impact from the time that a person reads the climate communication to the time that the person engages in the climate action, which can be very delayed at times. And this, so as for the impact, I just hope that this will help contribute to existing data on what works in engaging more people in climate action. And then so what's next for me? What compelled me to take this topic was that I was curious on what actually works. I wanted to learn, share knowledge, and make a measurable impact through writing. So I want to hope to do that professionally as a technical writer. And yes, I wanted to say thank you to Clarissa, Dr. Fenwa, Corey, and the entire team for this experience. And I'm very grateful to be able to share this presentation. And I want to ask if anyone had questions.
Fantastic. We have time for one question. So Nhi, there's some questions in the chat as well. So I'm going to actually just take a stab there for Rose's question. So hi, Nhi, thank you for your wonderful talk. Do you have any plans to take into consideration people who identify as non-binary within your study?
Right. Yes. I hope we would be able to consider that in future research, because I was not able to find any studies through my literature review that considered non-binary persons. So that I really hope that research will be done. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. If you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat. Nhi is still here. I think any feedback you give her, again, will help her towards her proposal that she'll be finishing up in the next week or so. Okay, Nhi, thank you so much. We are making our way here onto our last two. Thank you for all those who are hanging on. Kat, the floor is yours. Let's see, it's Kat. Oh, there you go.
My name is Kat, and I will be presenting today. DNA Could Be Your Destiny, Assessing the Role of Free Will in Religious People's Perception of Genetics. So, there we go. Okay. Okay, cool. So who am I? I just graduated from North Carolina State University. I have a BS in genetics and a BA in English. And I also minored in science communication. I'll be returning to NC State in the fall as a master's student. So I'll be completing an MS in technical communication. And then also just some personal information that is relevant to the presentation. I am agnostic. I live in North Carolina, so I live in the Bible Belt, and I was raised in an evangelical church. So to get started, many Americans do believe that a conflict exists between science and religion. However, a increasing number report that there is not actually a conflict between science and their own religious beliefs. So as you can see over here, there are 60% of people think that science and religion are often in conflict, but only 30% say that science sometimes conflicts with their own religious beliefs. And interestingly enough, the people who tend to perceive the most conflict between science and their beliefs tend to be people who are not actually religious themselves. So, so an example of this would be, climate change, and taking action on it is obviously historically a contentious issue. And so typically white conservative evangelicals tend to be the ones who have the most resistance toward taking action on it. They tend to have the lowest levels of belief in it. But even compared to 5 years ago, substantial numbers of those individuals are beginning to believe in it and want to take action on it and believe that it's actually a problem. So, but despite this progress on this and other more controversial topics, the opinions on advances in the field of human genetics remain mixed. So, for example, here we can see highly religious people in the US. This is from Pew I believe this one is from 2018. Highly religious people are more likely to oppose gene editing for babies. So, as you can see, there are, depending upon what the topic is, there is a lot of resistance towards gene editing for babies, even if you have like a low level of religiosity. So, for example, making the baby more intelligent, as you can see, even people who are lower, there's still a 72% resistance toward it. But also, as you can see, people who are highly religious in all categories are still the most resistant. And that holds true across all religions. So then when you break it out across different categories of Christian individuals, you can see that this also holds true to varying degrees, but it's still in almost all cases, you are still more likely to oppose it if you are Christian, religious in this case, or just unaffiliated. So unfortunately, I couldn't find any like broad, reliable data on other faiths in the US or anywhere in terms of their opinions on this. But I did find this survey that Pew did from, I think it was only like 2 years ago, I believe, just across individuals of other faiths. And I found this quote that I think really kind of summarizes a lot of things that seem to come up with religious individuals when you talk about genetic engineering and other human genetics technologies. So cloning, to put it simply, you're delving into an area where you're playing God. So this really summarizes, again, a lot of the things that I hear. And it's interesting because this narrative also kind of appears in climate change communication. So in climate change communication, a narrative that works really well with religious people is to tell them climate change is going against God's will. It is destroying the world that God made. Or if you don't believe in God, it is going against the natural order. Basically, this is not something that's supposed to happen. But when you take that narrative and you put it in the context of human genetics, suddenly that is creating resistance towards these technologies. So I am interested in the question, what role does a person's beliefs about free will play in the development of their opinions on human genetics? So if you think that DNA is your destiny, was that the way that God intended it to? If you edit someone's genome, are you going against God's will? Or did God know that this baby's genome was going to be edited? So therefore it is God's will. How does that play in? So to address this, I have 3 specific aims. So 1, determine if correlations exist between belief in free will and opinions on human genetics. 2, characterize messages about human genetics and their impacts on the opinions of religious people across time. 3, develop opportunities for dialogue centered on free will between religious groups and geneticists. So to go into each of these a bit more, So for aim 1, is there a correlation between belief in free will and perceptions of human genetics? I want to conduct a survey. This will not be restricted to religious individuals, although I am most interested in what the results are, both between religious groups and between like all religious people versus non-religious people. But the parts of the survey that I want to include will be demographics, beliefs, level of related knowledge, attention to scientific news, and obviously perception of the risks and benefits of human genetics. Specifically, I want to focus on the 3 following topics. So I'll be asking about the field as a whole, but also I want to know specifically what they think about genetically engineered babies, genetically engineered treatments for diseases that would be used for adults, so for like HIV, and then also cloning. So for aim 2, what messages have religious people been receiving about human genetics and how have those impacted their views over time? So this has 2 parts. First, I would like to, one, I would like to conduct a rhetorical analysis of the rhetoric used by scientists and other communicators when they speak to religious people. So this would be going back in time and looking at those both now and then how those going back decades, basically. And then I also want to do a lifetime assessment of religious people's opinions of human genetics. So this would follow religious people throughout their lives to see how their views of human genetics and how their religious beliefs change, and if there's any sort of correlation. Aim 3, how can we facilitate communication between scientists and religious people that is informed by the latter's views on free will? So there are lots of efforts to bring scientists and religious people together. So I would like to design something that does something similar to a lot of things where it's a bioethics workshop, but this is specifically focused on the concept of free will and playing God and all of that. So this would be a bioethics workshop. I essentially have 2 goals. So first, in and of itself, the workshop would provide a model for communication between religious and scientific leaders. So as they talk to each other, obviously this is providing a model that other people can use, but also as they discuss, I would like them to brainstorm ideas for further engagements, for further opportunities to engage the 2 groups. So that means both like the leaders in those areas, but also just, everyday scientists and everyday religious people. And, a genetics major who goes back and talks to her religious parents. What are some ways that people can talk while maybe acknowledging the specific dimension of free will and God's will and how those play into this? So in terms of the intellectual merit, this is an unexplored dimension of religious hesitation around these technologies. And as I already discussed with the climate change example, it does connect to other strategies used for science communication with religious people. So I think it would be interesting if, for no other reason than that a similar narrative is already effective when it comes to climate change communication. So how does that translate into this area? And this is a blurry picture, but I couldn't pass up the chance to use it. So the broad impact that I think would be the biggest thing to come out of this would be respecting these perspectives can help create messages and dialogue that are more effective and more inclusive. So this would be more effective in terms of communicating with people, but it's also more inclusive because we are including more and more people in the conversation about science and what we should do with it. So for my acknowledgements, I'd like to thank my mentor, Claire Holsowski, Dr. Fanuel, Wendy, and my fellow interns, and everyone else at SAI. Yay. Questions?
All right, Kat. Nice job. Nice job. Okay, questions? And Kat, oh yeah, there you go. Let's see. Okay, so you can drop questions in the chat as well. Any questions at all there? Okay, please share your questions to Kat in the chat or comments later. You can email her as well. I think you shared your email at the end, Kat, I'm not sure, but please, yeah, do share the insights. Thank you. And so we are gonna finish up here with Laz, another one of Claire's mentees. Laz, welcome to the floor.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Lazaro Bosch, and today we will be discussing what are the barriers in which research evidence is or is not used in science policy making settings. And like I said, my name is Lazaro Bosch, but everyone calls me Laz. Feel free to refer to me as Laz. I have a few passions in science, technology, policy, and communication strategies, and I'm a recent graduate of Florida International University. I've earned my bachelor's degree in digital media and communications, and I currently reside, even though I was born and raised in Miami, in Washington, D.C., and I currently hold a position in a lobbying firm and I am the communicator that bridges policy and researchers with policymakers in the public health space, in order to highlight their research and do more impacts and get them sustain their funding or increase their funding. And the big concept, as I mentioned, was what are the barriers between research evidence and researchers, and how is it being used or not used in policymaking settings and with policymakers. So understanding that these barriers, first I want to emphasize and highlight the relationship between researchers and policymakers. I like to think of it as their siblings under one big family unit. Siblings tend to argue back and forth, and sometimes there may not be clear communication, but overall I think with this kind of analogy, it'll help you guys understand in my findings when addressing these barriers on how I like to think of their relationship at the moment. 3 barriers we have to identify after doing a linear landscape analysis and being able to have informal interviews were negative attitudes and mistrust, misaligned incentives, and ineffective communication approaches, more from the researcher perspective. I've went ahead and plugged in some quotes from peer review articles and some discussions that I had with a few individuals in the field. So one of the quotes, and when it came to the first barrier, was that research is manipulated and persuasive. That came more from the policymaker background, and individuals or institutions care more about funding and publicity versus their constituents back home in their district or back home in their hometown. When it came to misaligned incentives, researchers tend to argue that there's just a lack of funding, but both sides were arguing that there's just not enough time for policymakers to understand the technical jargon or even include some of the research in their policymaking decisions or in a written law or whenever making such proposals. And then on the research side, they said they rather focus more time on their research versus building the relationships with policymakers. Of course, this is a very specific case, not all the time, but these were some of the topics that some of these peer review articles were highlighting. And when it came to ineffective communication approaches, it is because researchers argue that they have not been trained enough or have enough knowledge either in the communication setting, especially as we see a rise in more emerging technologies and in social media practices and trends, but also in the policymaking settings. And I went ahead and included the title if you guys want to check out that article. It was very extensive, but very helpful. And the process behind my research was, like I said, informal interviews. I spoke to specifically 2 SAI. Claire was my mentor. She did a wonderful job not only guiding me, but being part of this process. Dr. Bankston, as well as, just like Dr. Bankston, I went to Carlos Becerra, who advocates and is a lobbyist on behalf of researchers at my university. And I went and was able to get in contact with one of the researchers who peer-reviewed and was a co-author in 2 out of the 4 or 5 references that I have mentioned. And we had a great dialogue. So there's researchers, there's people in the advocacy space, in the higher academia space, and then of course in the SAI community. And now it's time to break down the aims. After having these informal interviews, I broke it down into 3, I like to say, clear aims. What is the role of a researcher? What is the role of a policymaker? And the most important aim I like to emphasize is the 3rd and final aim. What is that meaningful engagement between the researchers and the policymakers? Where has it been? What is it? And in order to identify these, I want to understand more about what the role of a researcher is. And researchers not only identify critical problems and the benefits and harms to policy solutions, but they estimate when it comes to the decision making what is right and what is wrong. And these are typically known as subject matter experts. They can testify before Congress, they can give their formal opinion, and they can even be as small as not only on the federal level, but more on the local level. When it comes to who are the major players, I like to think who are the ones that are going to fund science and are going to kind of do a blowhorn PSA, calling all scientists, calling all researchers. We tend to think of federal agencies like DOE, USDA, DOD, especially when it comes to veteran affairs. But more individual elected officials are going to look to individuals or academia or in a pool of scientists or researchers that can submit appropriations, or also known as earmarks. Academia is really big in the space that I've come to learn, and also when discussing it with my peers in informal interviews. And then understanding the role of policymakers, now that we have an understanding of why researchers and scientists get called and why these agencies and academia and other entities really want to play into this field. You have to understand the definition of policy. I think it's important to know that policy is not just an individual, it's not just a party, it's not a government entity, but it can be multiple or all entities all at once. And I like to recognize a research study by Cambridge University that the most recent past congressional applicants, there's about 435 House of Representatives, roughly 30 to 40 have a STEM technical background. It is a big step forward because we are seeing more and more in the last 5 years, different types of elected officials who were in their STEM fields and more technical backgrounds come into a field, the area of public service, but it's still not enough. I still feel that there should be more people with technical backgrounds or people who have more of an interest for it, simply because this is only when you put it into a percentile out of the 30 to 40 margin range that Cambridge found. It goes back to out of a total of 435, 8 to 10% roughly out of the entire House of Representatives, not even looking into the Senate side. So I think there's still a lot of work that needs to get done when it comes to encouraging not only STEM and researchers and scientists to play a role. But now we're going to identify what is the meaningful engagement. I went ahead and wanted to understand where is this engagement happening, and the engagement is typically found in think tanks like AAAS, AEI, and other different types of think tanks and organizations. Academia is a big funder, and academia tends to bring in a lot of researchers and scientists based on my personal experience and with dialogues of fellowships that are offered either through local government, state government, or even academia, and other types of organizations like the Planetary Society, like GSA, AAAS, and more so on elected officials who have a passion interest for this, and they offer more funding or they advocate for earmarks or appropriations back home in their district, especially those districts or states that get a lot of funding from NSF, for example, or they have a lot of major public universities that like to do research and their other projects. And when it comes to break down the intellectual merit, I think I've expressed enough that my interest and my current occupation helps bridge the gap. So I've been diving deep into what it means to play with both sides and how do I bridge that gap in policy. But there's still a lot more to examine when it comes to seeing different perspectives, whether I've laid out in my barriers and in my aims the role of a researcher or a policymaker. But overall, when bridging these two communities, I think there should be more of a discussion formed. And there is no one person or one organization or one formal solution to this. I think this presentation hopefully moves forward more possible solutions, whether that be a database where researchers can publish more peer-reviewed articles, or it becomes more accessible for science communicators to step up and be able to communicate both sides if the researchers don't have that experience, or the policymakers don't have the time to pull the research or the network of scientists and researchers. So what is that broader impact now that we've broken down all of this more complicated layers that has been in existence? The broader impact is that discussion, starting to make aware of this is a gap that needs to be closed, and whether that be through training researchers in more academic ways. So do we give them more fellowships? Do we increase their funding? Do we encourage academia to build and make more meaningful engagement and connections? Or bring more science communicators to instruct or perform communication strategies and teach them, even though the research can get more technical jargon, but teach them the technical multimedia skills needed. So these are my references that I list out, and I'm open to questions, and I appreciate all of you for being here and for the SAI team.
Yay, getting a lot of claps there, thumbs up from people, Laz. Any question? Anybody want to shoot away a question there to Laz? I'm impressed that you were able to get so many people there to chat with, Laz. You talked to Dr. Bankson and the other folks. So how was that experience? You want to share a little bit of that?
Yeah, so I think the most important part wasn't finding the peer review articles, but more having that meaningful discussions, because in that meaningful discussions from different perspectives, I was able to communicate with Hill staffers, and they referred me more to press statements or what the member was able to allocate in their districts. Then I went to talk to researchers, but then not only researchers like Mr. Lomas, who published their work, but more academia, because I think there's two different levels of funding and initiatives that come into that. And Dr. Lomas focuses on health, when academia can focus on a variety of topics. So having these meaningful engagement is exactly what I was proposing my solution, which is bringing more engagement and growing my network. And it only will make me a stronger, a more effective communicator in the science policy realm, having an understanding, thanks to SAI, of the background and all the elements that play into this.
Great. Rosario.
Thanks. I appreciated that. That was a great talk. So my question, I guess, is perhaps maybe another recommendation. I think it might be helpful to spend some more time kind of defining the problem, because I know you spent a lot of time kind of going into that, but kind of more, because I imagine that the problem is not necessarily just being able to work together, but different kinds of incentives that exist between these different groups of organizations. And I think that it would be useful to kind of explore that a little bit more deeply to kind of figure out where are the incentives coming from, because that's then where you can target your interventions.
Definitely, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and you have those tracks at the beginning. You shared them with us. I think it's a matter of picking a lane, right, Rosario, and expanding that further, because with each one the tree can grow, right? It can get really, really diverse. So great thoughts there, Rosario. And so with that, everyone, it's always bittersweet that we've come to this point for all the interns. Of course, this is not the end for them. They are now gonna take your feedback and tie up some loose ends with submitting that final proposal at the end of the month. But I really want to congratulate all of them for just sharing those insights. Great to see you, Susie, there. But yes, and so with that, this video, again, you can watch these later. They'll be available on the YouTube. Actually, it's available right now since we're live streaming this. But again, I want to say thank you to everyone for attending this event and celebrating with the interns. To the mentors, thank you. We're excited to launch this again next summer with another batch of interns. And it's always exciting because each year, different ideas, and we let the interns run with their ideas. We guide them, but ultimately they make the decisions in terms of what they want to figure out and how they want to do it. And we hope that some of these ideas actually come to fruition. And I'm really excited to continue working with my two interns this summer to see if this can get some real data out of this thing in the next year or two, and maybe leads to some publication, which has happened. former interns have published their work from here. So with that, that concludes the event for today. Thank you so much for hanging around till the end. The link, oh, by the way, the link to the feedback is in the chat. I'll share it with it again. There it is. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye.